The benefits for international companies of doing that is really to give them an additional source of liquidity to fund expansion in China.
Hello and welcome to our masterclass on the internationalization of the Chinese currency, the renminbi. I'm Brian Caplen, editor of The Banker. I'm here with Alexandra Gropp, who is regional head of Renminbi Solutions Europe for Standard Chartered. Now, Alexandra, we've talked about the offshore capital market. Let's talk about the onshore capital market. And tell me about the nature of the onshore Chinese bond market.
The onshore Chinese bond market and its reform is hugely significant. It's the third largest bond market in the world, so the liquidity in that market is significant and clearly a very good potential source of funding for not just for Chinese onshore companies, but certainly also for the international companies doing business in China. The reform of that capital market is underway. NAFMI, which is the key regulator for the interbank bond market, has indeed started looking at reforming that market. One of the challenges of the China onshore market is, although the interbank bond market is the biggest portion of the market, there are different segments to the bond market, all being regulated by different entities. That makes reform and...
okay, so the regulators have got to talk to each other.
Indeed. Yeah. I think the regulators have to really work together to find a model that that allows certainly a certain standard of disclosure when it comes to issuers accessing that market, and also allows investors then to make a very informed credit decision on what they're buying, and indeed ensuring that I think they have all the information that they need to make an informed assessment.
All right, now if I'm an international company, I mean, how far away do you think it is for me to be allowed to go and raise money in the Chinese bond market? And what would be the advantages of me being able to do that?
Today you can approach the regulator already, and many companies are in the process of doing that and talking to regulators about accessing the onshore bond market.
All right, but they have to get permission bond by bond, yeah.
Yes, you would have to get permission. You would have to get permission prior to issuance, and the challenges are several. Documentation, for example, is not going to be as issuer-friendly as it is in the dim sum bond market. Right. I think the regulators have stated that using the MTN program internationally, that you set up internationally, is not going to be an option. So there's got to be separate documentation, which will have to be translated in Chinese. Accounts potentially would have to be separately prepared as well, according to Chinese GAAP.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of stuff to get through there before you can do an issue. But if you could get through all the hurdles, what would be the benefits for an international company to do that?
The benefits for international companies of doing that is really to give them an additional source of liquidity to fund expansion in China. A lot of the companies that are still very investment intense in China face restrictions of actually getting funds into the country to fund their expansion. And also with liquidity conditions getting tighter in China, that potentially faces corporates with the challenge, how do I fund my business going forward, and how can I diversify away from just bank funding? Yeah. Because not all issuers have the option to really take advantage of the well-priced dim sum bond market, versus the onshore route, because they can't get funds into China. That's the challenge with it.
And also, presumably it would be very advantageous for Chinese investors, because at the moment they only really have bank deposits as their main outlet for investing their funds.
Absolutely. I think this is a reform that's not just for issuers but also for investors, to really lead to a to a market that, that meets international standards in terms of pricing methods and disclosure requirements.
And clearly where all this is leading is to open China's capital account completely. So, I mean, how far away do you think we are from that, and how many more steps are there to go?
It's difficult to say how far away we are from a sort of true capital markets reform until that fully opens up. I think we need to look ahead a few years, but I think we will see the first issues happening, potentially even this year. If those challenges on the documentation front and also the use of proceeds, if those all can be overcome, I think there is certainly the merit to tap these markets. It's going to be key for the international corporates to be able to use the funds raised in China, that they can actually be used there for investment, because if one took those funds offshore, there would be very expensive funding swapped into home currency.
Yeah.
There's still a long way to go in terms of really pushing through those reforms, and particularly when it comes to the capital markets reform and the interest rate liberalisation. Those are complex matters which are not going to be all resolved overnight. They require significant collaboration and communication between the regulators.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll watch that with interest.
Thank you.